If there's one surefire way to turn your kids off drugs, it's to tell them how many cabinet ministers have tried cannabis. Today we had the likes of the Home Secretary Jacqui Smith and the Chancellor Alistair Darling clamouring to confess about past dope misdemeanours. They've been joined by 5 others. So does it make the public think less of them for breaking the law, or more of them for fessing up and then getting on with the job? Indeed, does anyone care? The skeletons couldn't tumble out the cupboard quickly enough today. Just 24 hours after Gordon Brown announced the reclassification of cannabis, the Home Secretary Jacqui Smith owned up to trying it.
I took cannabis a few times when I was at university more than 25 years ago. It was wrong.
She joins a long line of ministers who've now revealed a heady university life. Charles Clarke, the former Home Secretary, also admitted taking it a couple of times in his late teens. Jacqui Smith's confession was quickly followed this morning by the Home Office Minister Tony McNulty. So as the day unfolded, a rush of cabinet ministers confessed to marijuana use: Chancellor Alistair Darling, Transport Secretary Ruth Kelly, Treasury Secretary Andy Burnham and the Enterprise Secretary John Hutton. Yvette Cooper and Hazel Blears have both made admissions in the past.
Drugs are a scourge on our society.
Conservatives adapted a similar stance back in 2000 when Anne Widdecombe called for a harder line on drugs. 7 shadow cabinet admitted cannabis use, including Francis Maude and Oliver Letwin. David Cameron still maintains a more private stance.
The smell was unbelievably strong. This sort of grown in greenhouses skunk is unbelievably powerful, and it is completely different to... yeah, I think I'll stop there.
In the 1970s, drug use by a politician was still considered a security risk, exposing them to possible blackmail. Have attitudes changed, at least in regard to cannabis? In 1992, Bill Clinton famously claimed to have experimented with marijuana without inhaling. Presidential candidate Senator Barack Obama, in his memoir Dreams from My Father, published 10 years ago, freely admitted to smoking marijuana and makes an oblique reference to hard drugs.
I blew a few smoke rings, remembering those years. Pot had helped, and booze, maybe a little blow when you could afford it. Not smack, though.
In a survey earlier this year, over 80% of people believed cannabis use at school or university by politicians didn't matter. So is it time just to stop the hypocrisy, or would that be a slippery step down a path few people in power are prepared to go? Well, with me now is the Tory MP Tim Yeo, who, when he was in the shadow cabinet, admitted to having smoked cannabis and enjoyed it in his past. And the Labour MP and former Home Office Minister George Howarth is in Liverpool. We can't stop the Home Office ministers from coming out and admitting it today, George Howarth. What's going on?
Well, I think most people recognise that a youthful indiscretion many years ago doesn't bar somebody from taking a position now, either high office in the cabinet or indeed to take a policy position, which is what Jacqui Smith was doing by floating the idea of declassifying or raising the classification of cannabis. But I mean, it's something they do voluntarily. I don't think it should be something that is automatic or expected or goes with the territory.
Do you think there's a certain badge of pride that it puts politicians in tune with others of their generation?
I hope not, because, I mean, if there's a badge of pride involved, that sends out all the wrong signals to young people today. I hope what it is basically they're taking the wise decision to say, look, in my youth I did this, it's not something I would advocate now, and, you know, it doesn't debar me from making policy about these matters.
Tim Yeo, you're pretty much on your own in the admission that you took it and enjoyed it. What made you say that?
Well, because it happened to be the truth, and I thought at the time, since there was a sort of great kind of unburdening by all my colleagues in the shadow cabinet of what their experiences had been, I might as well make that clear. I don't think it's terribly important either way whether people enjoyed it. The fact was it was against the law, and so we shouldn't have been doing it. But what's really good now is that the taboo that surrounded this subject for many years, that's gradually being eroded, and I think it's much healthier that people can talk about their experiences and hopefully learn from them.
Is it good that the taboo's gone, George Howarth? I mean, is it better that it's in the public domain, or is it normalising it and giving it a sense of being condoned?
Well, let me answer that in 2 parts. I mean, first of all, I don't think it should be incumbent upon anybody to reveal all of their youthful indiscretions, but it's probably a wise thing to do, and I think those ministers who come out and said what they said today took a wise course of action. But I think it's incumbent upon them and all of us to say, you know, this is not to say it's a good thing to do. I mean, whatever Tim smoked in his youth is entirely different from the skunk that is available on the streets today, which can often lead to people having severe mental health problems, particularly if it's used heavily. So we've got to, at the same time as saying, look, you know, these things happened in the past, nobody's proud of it, the wise thing to do is to get it out of the way and say it happened.
Well,
from the reality of saying to young people, this is not a good thing to do, and if you use it heavily, you could end up with mental health problems.
Yeah. Why all the euphemism? I mean, starting with Clinton and didn't inhale, why has it been so hard for politicians just to say it and get on with it?
Well, I think that's really what I mean about the taboo, that people didn't feel they could say honestly that they had enjoyed it. They had to sort of cover it up in some kind of curious fabric. George is right, of course. The sort of cannabis that might have been smoked at universities 20 or 30 years ago is different from what may be available today. And he's right also that although I think it's healthy for some politicians, even the Home Secretary, to be quite frank about this, there should be no obligation. We don't want a witch hunt on those people who prefer to keep it as a private matter. They're quite entitled to do that. I think someone who comes into elective office doesn't have to say everything that they did.
Of course, and you anticipate where I'm going with this. If we swap the word cannabis for cocaine, would you still get admissions then? Would it be completely impossible, for example, for David Cameron to admit taking other drugs?
Well, I think he's quite entitled to say that he won't answer these questions. As it happens, I think the public's reaction today, even to an admission that someone had taken cocaine, would be much less dramatic than it would have been even 10 years ago. I think we're all becoming a lot more mature.
But would anyone in power risk it?
Well, I think that it's certainly a substantial further step because it's a much less common thing. I mean, certainly in my generation, cocaine was virtually unknown. I think that there would naturally be, it's a much more serious drug, it's of a different order of criminality at present. But I think the public reaction now, even so, would be quite tolerant.
Thank you both very much indeed. Thanks for your time, gentlemen.